Hi everyone, this is Ray Poynter and welcome to If It Can Be Automated, It Should Be. This is the first of 5 webinars that we're going to have on the topic of automation in 2017, automation in the market research industry, automation in the insights business. We're very glad that this series has been sponsored by Zapistore. There's also accompanying this broadcast, and there will be accompanying all the other broadcasts too, a report, and Stephen Phillips from Zapistore and I have produced the manga version. It's not quite, but it is highly graphical as well as words. You can download that from the website and have a look at that in conjunction or instead. So the agenda for today, we're going to look at a bit of background, a lesson from history, and then I'm going to focus on the core benefits, the 4 key benefits that we get from automation. Then I'm going to look at how do you choose which operations and options and tasks to automate first, and then we're going to pull that together with a summary and then a Q&A session. So in terms of background, many of you will be familiar with the GRIT report, the Green Book Research Industry Trends report. The last one, produced towards the end of last year, had a section on what were the key trends that were happening in the research and insights industry, and automation was the second biggest one in that. A lot of people showing a lot of agreement that this is a key factor. Now that led to Lenny Murphy of Green Book and myself producing this report, which you can download from the website, looking at automation, a journey, not a destination, because automation isn't new. We've always been doing automation. Herman Hollerith in the United States used automation to speed up the 1890, that's right, 1890 US Census, and he created the tabulating machines and the card readers and automated that process, and we have seen optical scanners, double entry punch machines, all sorts of things over the years, the whole CATI process. All of this has been automation. So automation is not new and it will not finish. We are not just about to go into a phase of automation. We're going to be doing automation for the next 10, 20, 30, maybe 100 years. We've got this series going on, and I hope you will join us for the next 4 broadcasts within that, and each one of those is going to be accompanied by a report, because I feel that automation is going to be in 2017 probably the most important thing for research organizations to get right, for suppliers of services to research organizations. It's going to lead to some companies being much more successful, and it's going to lead to some companies not being successful, falling by the wayside. So at the corporate level, it's going to be phenomenally important. Now for individuals, it's going to be important because you want to be in those organizations that are doing well, and within those organizations you want to be the person or amongst the people who are doing well, and from client side you want to be leveraging the new opportunities that it's going to produce, and I'm going to show you some of those today. But I'm going to start off with another bit of history, really, the Ballad of John Henry. So back in the 19th century, John Henry was a railway man. He helped build the railways across America. He drove a metal spike into rock, pulled the spike out, they put the dynamite in, they blasted the rock away. And this was how it was done, and then they brought in steam engines. And John Henry thought that it was wrong that a machine should do the job of a man. So he asked the railroad owner, could he have a challenge? They had a face-off, John Henry against the steam engine. And the really interesting thing about the story is that on the one hand, John Henry won. He drove more meters, or yards as it would have been in the United States, than the steam engine. But he fell down dead at the end of the process. And that, I think, is a really key learning for the research industry. It's not about whether we can beat the machine. Whenever a machine is doing the same job as us, essentially, we want to be using the machine to get to the next level. Otherwise, we will end up like John Henry. Now, there are 4 key benefits for automation. We don't get them every time, and I'm going to talk about that, but the benefits that are available are cheaper, faster, scalable, and better. And I'm going to look at each of these 4 separately to start with. Cheaper is a fairly straightforward thing. If we can automate a process properly, it will very often be cheaper to do. One person can produce more products. They can produce those products without as many different steps or as many errors. So costs fall. Now that sounds like a great thing. And in lots of ways, it is a great thing that costs fall, but it doesn't make the companies that do it any more profitable because prices fall. If you can automate something, then usually so can your competitors. The reason you have to do it is that your competitors will do it and their prices will fall. And if your prices don't fall, you will be out of business. This is one of the key reasons that automation leads to some businesses folding. It drives down costs, and when costs go down, competition means prices go down. Doesn't mean that margins have to disappear, doesn't mean that profit has to disappear, but it will mean that prices fall. And in the best cases, and we can see the way that the internet, a form of automation in market research, has worked, the market grows. So when we started to be able to make pots and pans through automation, more people had them. When we could make glass bottles through automation instead of individual artisans, many more people had them. The industry grew. When Ford brought in his automation for car industry, it grew the car industry by hundreds of millions of cars. It grew employment, it grew incomes because the market grows. Of course, the market doesn't have to grow. We saw an interesting piece of automation in the research industry. We used to punch paper questionnaires by hand. And then there was some really clever automation that brought in optical scanning. And it brought the price of punching paper questionnaires down a bit. But that was not enough to compete with telephone interviewing. And it wasn't enough to compete later on with internet interviewing. So although there was an optimization that brought the price down, it wasn't accompanied by a growth in the market for paper questionnaire usage because of other factors. So what we're looking for when we're doing automation is, can we use it to grow the market? We're not looking for new automations that mean that we are going to be able to cut our costs and charge higher prices. That doesn't happen. But if one of our competitors automates and they can cut their prices, we have to cut our prices, and that typically means we have to automate too. So that's the first key benefit, cheaper. The second benefit is faster, and faster is only a benefit if it generates more users. So one of the things that has held back the use of market research over the decades has been that too many decision makers have felt it was too slow. So I'm actually broadcasting from Sydney at the moment, and I was involved in a roundtable with several clients, one of whom was the Art Gallery of New South Wales. And they were talking about the benefits of the automation they're using, which makes their process faster for research. And I said, okay, but how long is a typical project? And they said, well, several months. And why is faster better? As we discussed it became really apparent that faster was better because during those several months that decision makers and curators were looking at the issues, when they wanted to know what customers thought, visitors to the museum, they wanted to know it quickly. They wanted to know it now. So even in a process that doesn't move very quickly, the desire to have that information is rapid. It's what many people call the speed of business. We want to be able to deliver insights fast enough to matter. If I can't have that information tomorrow, it's no use. In 2 days' time, it might be perfect, but I will have made my decision by then. I might get remorse for my decision because the research tells me I'm probably going to fail, but it's not useful. So the faster we can get research and insights, the more users we can put it to. And we must only do it in places where faster actually helps. So if you take something like blood testing, it happens overnight generally. If you could improve the machine from 7 hours to 6 hours, it would produce no net benefit, because it would still be an overnight process. It's when it becomes a same-day process, while you wait process. So when we're looking at our research processes, we want to be looking for places where speed actually changes the deliverable, the action that people can take that promotes evidence-based decision making, because that's where faster is actually a benefit. And then we get a really interesting one, and an opposite meme I'm going to suggest in a moment: scalability. If you want to be able to do this thousands of times instead of a handful of times, you need to automate, because people are a scarce resource. They are the scarcest resource. The amount of data, the amount of projects, they're all growing exponentially. The number of good people is staying relatively static, and it's going to. And labor costs are going up, which is great. We want labor costs to go up because that means we are earning more money. But we need to make things scalable so that all of that works. And automation is a key part of being scalable. We come back to Ford and the production of the motor car. It's all about scalability. You look at the really big research projects, you look at the TNS projects, the Ipsos ones, the Millward Brown ones, they're all scalable. That is one of the key benefits of them. And so we look at those and say, yeah, that's where it needs to be. But it's not going to be where everybody wants to be. There is the artisan as well, who will deliberately choose to produce something which can't be scaled because there is value in that. There is perceived value, there is genuine value, and there is the potential to earn much higher income if you're involved in that process. So if you want to be an artisan, if you want to be skilled, you can actually turn this meme around and say, if it can be automated, I'm not doing it. If you really want to be in that consultative space, that innovative space, that place where you are the ethnographer, where you're giving the insight, where it's really deep understanding, that becomes your mantra. If it can be automated, I'm not doing it. Because if it can be automated, it will be, because your competitors will do it. There is a lot of scope for the artisan, but all the time, make sure you're doing something that can't easily be replicated by a system. And then we get to the issue of better, and some things are not better automated. I love sushi. I cannot imagine going to a sushi restaurant where a machine slices and dices and serves the fish and the sashimi and the sushi rolls and the vinegared rice and so on. And in fact, even if it tasted as good, I'm not sure that I'd enjoy it, because I like looking at the sushi master creating it. So there are lots and lots of places where automated is not going to be better. Almost all face-to-face qual does not currently benefit from automation. The only things that it benefits from are quicker use of the transcripts, better video editing and capture, those pieces around the periphery. But the real heart of face-to-face qual is still much better when it's done by humans. One of the really key things that humans are still involved in and are going to be is understanding the research problem, going to meet a client and finding out what the real problem is. We're light years away from that being better. But there are other places where automation is better. I do not want an iPhone or a Samsung Android phone that somebody has built with a soldering iron. I want to know that I've got one of those built by the robots. I want the really high quality. Frankly, when a lot of my blood tests and things like that go off, I want to know that a computer has read them. Sometimes it's really trivial. There's a book I've been rereading recently, Andrew Ehrenberg's Data Reduction book. It was written in the 1970s. It's a brilliant book. I recommend it. But there's a few places where it looks kind of quirky because of the changes that have happened over time. So he takes the median and says, well, it's a great measure. I don't recommend it because it's really hard work to calculate the median. Because before we had the automation, before we had the SPSSs and the Excels, you had to arrange all your data into order and find where the middle case was. So when we're looking at running correlations and tables, tables didn't used to have the benefit of automation. When I was doing my A-level in maths, we use slide rules. We are so much better off with that automation there. Similarly, if you're doing a discrete choice model exercise, you want the design, the experimental design, to come from an automated machine. You want the allocation of the tasks and the control of those tasks to be automated. You want the hierarchical Bayes analysis of that data to be automated. Whenever you're running cluster analyses and these sort of options, yet you want those processes to be automated. So there are a lot of cases around where automation is already in the research world and is distinctly better. When we're looking at sample control mechanics, using routers to blend sample together, that is typically done better by machines than it's done by people. So sometimes we use automation to get a better product. Now, not every project delivers all four. The most successful automation, and by successful I mean it has generated more money and has changed the research industry by a larger amount, has been the move to online surveys. Massive automation, massive change, an enormous number of interviewers no longer working as interviewers, so obviously that's the first downside. And only a handful of people believe the data we collect from online surveys is better than the data we collected from face-to-face surveys. It's actually, in most cases, probably a little bit worse, but it's cheaper, faster, and scalable. So sometimes it's enough for it to be cheaper, faster, and scalable. Sometimes it's enough for it to be better because you're getting a better product from it. What we're looking for is to get as many of these benefits as we can, but then to be quite honest with ourselves about which we're getting and why we're getting and how we're going to use them. Better is only useful if somebody wants better. Scalable is only useful if we want the organization to be bigger, if there is a bigger market. If we're already meeting the needs of the market, then scalable doesn't help. Faster only matters if we can get more people into the market. There are more situations when research is going to be used. Things like agile development, test and learn are all based around combining cheaper and faster. I can afford to do more tests, and the tests are fast enough that I don't feel like I'm slowing the process down. So we're going to blend these together when we look at how we're going to use them in research. One of the sometimes dirty words in this process is standardization. You cannot have automation without standardization. But too often, what people are talking about is cookie cutter standardization, where everything comes the same. And if you're making gingerbread men, actually you do want cookie cutter. You don't want the first customer to have one with 3 arms, the next one to have one with 2 arms, one to have a slightly bigger cookie and the next one to have a slightly smaller cookie. People get unhappy with that. So if you're making cookies, or if you're doing linked tests, or if you're doing these sorts of standardized products, you want them to be the same every time. Standardized and cookie cutter actually work. But there's a much, much bigger world, a much more exciting world. And I call this the Lego world. Why is Lego such a creative tool? Because all the pieces work together. And that is what we're looking for in a lot of the standardization we're doing, is how do we build a Lego set so that we can create massively new and innovative projects out of components that work together. And that is what we need to be thinking about in terms of standardization. So there probably is a best way of asking NPS. We may or may not like NPS. We know we have to ask it. So once we found the best way, we should ask it that way. There are best ways of asking 5-point scales and 7-point scales. There are better wordings and worse wordings. At the moment, the research industry mixes up the good ways and the bad ways pretty much willy-nilly. I don't see it as a problem if we move into a much more standardized approach, that we build those units together, how, don't know, not applicable, and all of these factors fit into that. If we can move to a world where we have more like the semantic web and schemas, where the data makes sense and they can be processed in more intelligent ways, that is going to help us, not hinder us. So we're committed. We've been sold on this message. We're going to automate. What do we do next? Well, there are two key things that will drive that. The first is what's going to generate the best return on investment. The fundamental reason for a business to automate is that it's going to protect the business, or it's going to grow the business. It's going to generate some genuine return on the investment. So you need to look and see what is going to be returned by this process. And then you've got priorities. The priorities will be things like, we think that we need to talk to these clients in this way. We've got a skill set, we've got a new idea. That idea is being held up because we have a pinch point, we have a slow process going on there, we have a lack of standardization. So we're going to blend our best return on investments with our best priorities to take us forward into the right sort of place. And then we get the much bigger thing. We've got all these different tasks going on. And so let's just work through some thoughts about how we make the selection. The first is that unless you love technology and failure, avoid the bleeding edge. Do not be the first person to use that new technology. Now, for most of you, that will mean not going into AI in a big way. By all means, experiment a little bit on the side, but don't have it as a core step you're taking in 2017. Stay away from that automated facial coding until you are really sure that other people are getting ROI from it. What you want to see is other people who have a relatively similar business need to you and a relatively similar research need to you getting ROI before you move into that zone. You want to get your payback within 12 months. So from the day when you start to implement the scheme, the clock is ticking, and 12 months later, you must have already made back your investment. It must be in place and it must be running. The speed that the world is changing at the moment, if you have something that takes 2 years, it's actually going to be out of date before it is working. You're looking for things that you can pick up and put into the business and move forward with faster than that. You're looking to integrate systems. So I talked about Lego earlier. Well, there are other systems where children and men play with toys, Meccano, Connects. You need to make sure that all of your standardization, all of your automation is Lego, or all of it is Meccano, or all of it is Connects. Don't mix and match different systems together. So if you're a Salesforce organization, you want to integrate everything with Salesforce. Nothing along that says, well, we're great, but actually we're more this sort of feature or this sort of function. Make your life easier as part of this path to automation. You're avoiding the bleeding edge, you're taking units that can be done quickly, and they're going to integrate together in an interlocking system. Self-contained tasks where you actually know you finish it. So we're looking at this part of the questionnaire design process. It's going to integrate with other things, but it has a sense of beginning, middle, and end itself. We can work on that, and we know when it's finished, and it's going to finish and be implemented within the 12 months. It's got to be something that's big enough to matter. And occasionally I see people integrating something because it's a task they really loathe, but you look at it and they only do it twice a year, and it only takes about half a day. And actually, those sort of things, you should just suck them up and do them, because the gains aren't big enough. The speed that the world is changing, your competitors are looking to get some really big benefits by going to new tools, by using standardized approaches, by using test and learn, by taking the sort of shrink-wrapped products that we see from Zappy Store and speeding up their process. So your automation has to be around things that are big enough to matter. And you've got to generate big savings, because nearly every project I see achieves fewer savings than was expected. It's very rare that you run a project and the savings turn out to be bigger. So it's got to have really big savings up front, because you're probably going to undershoot on those savings. So you want a good margin within that. And then I always say, do the worst jobs first. You don't want to just do these. You want to be able to go and have a look at what else is going on. If you want to get buy-in from your staff and colleagues, have a look at the things that happen a lot and people really don't like them. So if you can automate timesheet stuff, that's a good thing to automate because people loathe it. A lot of that data entry, a lot of the checking processes, they're well worth automating too. Pinch points, things that are stopping you expanding, things that are stopping your business from growing, those are worth changing and following up with as well, because that is all part of this scalable. How can I move to the next level? And client focused. So don't automate something which you think is a great idea, but clients don't. So you might be able to automate the report back. So the clients simply get a mechanical system, the data is piped through to them. That doesn't necessarily seem like a benefit to them. So make sure that when you pick an automation, it is actually perceived by the end users as better. So they're going to like faster. They're going to like more flexible. Now I can not only get that initial report, but I can dive into the data myself. All of those are good things. So in summary, automation is going to be the biggest game in town, 2017 and 2018. It's a bigger issue than non-conscious measurement, behavioral economics, and all of those sort of things, because it's going to change the speed and the cost of our industry. If it can be automated, it should be. If it can't be automated, don't do it. That's this bleeding edge message. This is trying to bring in automatic recognition of video before it's a really proved technique. By all means, experiment, but don't bet on these technologies that aren't actually working. Look for the ones that are working and implement those. You're looking to maximize the returns, and think Lego, not cookie cutter. Don't think it means that you have to have a race to the bottom, that everything has to be the same. It doesn't. It can still be highly innovative. It's the way you combine things that counts, not just what the things are. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions.
So yes, we do have a couple of questions. We have one from Peter Chopra, who says, who asks, how does the bleeding edge start if everyone waits for someone else to use it first, especially as MR views all innovation as bleeding edge?
There are always people around, people like me, and actually, Betty, people like you that will go for the bleeding edge. So my advice to any sensible company is not to, because actually there are a lot of people out there doing that. And if you look at a great example of people who have been using geolocation-based mobile surveys, I've probably seen 30 different companies move into that space. None of them have actually broken through, and they're real heroes for trying, but you don't necessarily want to bet your company on that space. So my advice is, if psychologically you're the sort of person that can avoid the bleeding edge, avoid it. If psychologically you're the sort of person who can avoid creating your own startup company, you should. So you and I can't avoid it, Betty, so we're in that space. But my advice to people is not to be there.
Right, okay. Well, I think following up from Peter's question, because I think Peter might be interested in this. So in the case that you are somebody who has an idea that we would say is potentially bleeding edge, but they're taking your advice in this instance, Ray, they're not starting a company, seeing, somebody else does that first. How does that potentially affect things like patents, copyrights? Because some people really do want to start these businesses and be the first because they can have perceived intellectual property protection. What would you sort of say about those kind of issues?
I can't remember a successful innovation in market research that managed to be protected, particularly in the area of innovation. Actually, that's not quite true. There are small parts of online focus groups which were patented and protected by individual companies, and people worked around those. usually, once you can see something working, there are multiple alternative ways of making that work. So once you see that something is a working product, and typically that will mean, is somebody doing it in another country, or is somebody doing it in an adjacent industry? So if I'm in pharma, I'm going to be looking at fast moving consumer goods and say, well, if it's working there, I can pick it up. And I'm going to look really innovative in pharma, but actually I'm taking something that's already working. I go and I listen to clients presenting at IIEX, for example, and I notice, there's a lot of them using implicit association testing. I better get up to speed on that, because that has moved in. So I can be the first person in my city, I can be the first person in my part of the industry to use it, even if I'm not the first person globally who's going to use it.
Right, okay. Well, thank you, Ray. And we have a few more questions. We have two actually from Sophia Papadopoulos. And one of her questions is there anything that is surprising that is not automated?
I am surprised that more questionnaire writing is not automated. The closest we see to automated questionnaire writing at the moment is the use of libraries. So there are a lot of software platforms out there that will do that. Another use of that would be things like Validated. They would be like Zapistore, where the questionnaire is built into the method, so you don't have to write the questionnaire. But the thing that surprises me is that when most research agencies get a customer satisfaction project, they write that survey with a junior research exec. It frequently isn't great. When I see a concept test coming through, people are reusing things manually, but they're not using technology. And really, this would be a very straightforward use of technology. So I am surprised that more surveys aren't written with automated techniques at the moment.
Right, okay. And a question, we'll come back to Sophia's second question.
Sorry, Betty, I'm going to come back to a second. Yes. And perhaps even more shocking is that most of the good survey platforms have an automated checking function in them. So after you've written your survey, you can press that and it will run 100,000 synthetic interviews on there, and you can check. And the number of researchers who don't press the button and use the automated checking is mind-boggling. So that is somewhere where automation exists. It would improve the quality. It doesn't change the speed, doesn't change the cost, but it would improve the quality, and it's frequently not used.
That's interesting. And do you have any other examples of things like that, Ray? Automation in market research that, for one reason or another, human beings just don't want to use?
A lot of the automated checking. So again, some of the systems will looking at it on different mobile phones and things like this, and some of those systems again are not being used. And you even come across people who will write something in Word and it's got a red squiggly line underneath it, and they don't wonder why that red line is there. So there does seem to be a little bit of an issue when we leave it up to the human to decide whether to accept the advice. So maybe some of those automations need to come with are you really sure that you want to spell bath with 2 A's in the middle?
Right, okay. Coming back, I'll come back to Sophia's second question in a moment. Let's have this one from Andrew Jevons, who I believe is listening from the States. How do you overcome resistance to automation with certain practice areas such as qualitative research?
Usually by moving around them, because they will often be very willing to do some tasks and not others. So most qualitative researchers now will use digital recorders. They will use quite sophisticated video capture techniques and things like that. But the second element is the newer researchers coming through, where the millennials are coming in, who are much more accepting of a lot of the newer techniques. So I would probably be looking to enlist a lot of those inside the qualitative process. And I mentioned that most face-to-face actually isn't prime time yet. However, digital qualitative already uses a lot of automation. If you want to do an online discussion, you will be posting those questions in advance. Some of them have got automated probing within that. If you're doing an online focus group, you will have a discussion guide already programmed in. You'll have all the prompts programmed in so that you can just press the buttons and get this to happen. Now that is an automation. Mm-hmm. The next step, of course, is going to be processing it, and that's the analysis of it, and that's another step.
Right, okay. And so another question from Peter Chopra. Is there a benchmark for clients or agencies to know if they're moving forward quickly enough with automation? So in your experience, Ray, do you think that there are some signs people can pick up on, say, well, actually, I should be automating this process or this product or something?
When the decision happens without research, that is a good sign. So it either means the research is too expensive, it's not adding enough value, or it's too slow. Often it means it's too slow. So if when you pitch for a job, you normally lose them to another research agency, that is less worrying than you pitch a job and the research doesn't happen. That is where you are probably going to benefit most from automation, where the problem is the client isn't doing the research because it's not delivering the results fast enough, or it's not going to fit in as a cheap enough, fast enough turnaround to be able to do test and learn.
Right, okay. A question I have, based on your very interesting slide, artisan sort of versus automation, if you like. What would you say to those organisations who do have automated processes and products, but frequently, and I've seen this in my experience in previous agencies I've worked for, Ray, I'm sure you've seen this, where there is you have some clients who want to customise and have that almost artisan element to some of the things that you've already automated, but they want something that maybe reflects their brand, is white labelled in some way. How do you think kind of the artisan requests and people can work with automation?
Usually it's a mistake when clients do that, and sometimes I tell them, and that not always goes down very well. So let's say there are 20 manufacturers of breakfast cereals, and 19 of them are buying into a system that works really well, and one company thinks it should be different. Most times they're wrong. Most times they should change their processes to fit in with the much more efficient way that other people have done it. So quite often it's legacy, which means I want to do it like we used to do it. And so it's a great source of money for software producers and for platform producers when somebody comes along and says, yeah, we'll buy your system, but can we pay to have this conversion so it does this to it, or it can make this modification to it, or we can ask the question that way round. Now, of course, every so often, maybe 1 in 20 cases, they're right to do that. But most times I see it, they are a hostage to fortune, because they pay to get version 1 modified to meet their needs, and then version 2 is launched and they have to pay for version 2 to be modified to meet their needs, and then version 3 modified to meet their needs. And they would be in most cases advised to try to change their processes. And this isn't a research alone issue. I've in the past had quite a lot to do with large accounting systems for county councils and borough councils and things like this. And those councils that pay for the modification are just wasting ratepayers' money and taxpayers' money. And it's the same in our industry. So generally speaking, don't do that.
Right, okay, good advice. Hope lots of agencies are listening to that. Actually, Ray, while you were answering that, we've had a few more questions coming, so I'm not sure if we've got time for a few more.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Okay, great. So from Shana Morelli, can you speak to the role of tech versus the role of humans? I find that many people think that the tech will be automated kind of like magic without the involvement of human beings. So what would you say about that, Ray, the involvement of the human touch in automation?
It will vary. There are going to be some places where the automation will remove the human. So if we take online surveys, there used to be an interviewer. Now people fill in them surveys themselves. And one of the big trends in society is towards DIY. So in many countries, you now drag your wheelie bin out to the curb as opposed to somebody walking down your drive and picking up your rubbish. You will take money out of the bank from an ATM machine rather than having a human serve you that. You will book your flights and hotels through that. You will go to a Zappy store or something like that and you'll buy the services. So that side of it absolutely takes people out of the loop. But at the other end, what we are going to see are more and more data scientists. We're going to see more and more qual researchers who are using these techniques to become much more productive. And as I said earlier, I'm in Sydney at the moment, and I had dinner the other night with Tim Bogg, who is the creator of the Q software, which is really nice data analysis software. And his perception is very clear and it's very revealing, which is the world's getting more complicated. There's getting more data. We are not going to get more data scientists. We're not going to get more quantitative analysts. And most of what people do at the moment is actually clerical work. It's not really analytical work. So we want to remove all of that clerical so that people become free to use their intellect, to use their creative ability to get that stuff to work. And in many ways, this is the way that artists work with modern digital tools to be productive and sometimes to work in ways and dimensions that aren't possible with just pen and paper. You can create this virtual space, virtual reality, all sorts of new things which are based on technology but are created by human creativity, human intelligence. And that sort of symbiosis is going to be a really interesting, important part of where we're going.
Indeed, yes, I couldn't do the work that I do without Photoshop, certainly. Right, so another couple of questions, Ray. This one from Leonie Vos, and Leonie asks, any movements in the direction of automation across the research process, for example, meta-level quality assurance, rather than within each part of the process separately?
Absolutely, a lot. So one of the things that the big panel companies, the SSIs, the Research Nows and so on, have been doing, the Telunas and all of these companies, is putting in masses of quality checks and things to try to root out fraudulent people, try to root out people who are not paying enough attention, try to find people who are registered twice. And all of those techniques are automated. Most of them will have some sort of system of checking whether the survey they've been sent is suitable for a mobile device. If it's not, they will tell the agency and they will ensure that people using mobile devices are not sent that survey. So all of that is looking at meta information and also paradata to say this is what should be happening, this is how it is happening. And when it works, you don't know it's there. It's like all the work that happens to turn the lights on and make water come out of your tap. You only notice when it doesn't happen. So every project you run with a large panel company or a user of a panel company that works has worked because of a lot of clever automation of the process and checking and metadata cleaning and so on in the background.
Right, okay, thank you, Ray. And a follow-up question from Leonie. This is a very good question. Is bad automation worse than none at all? For example, stats packages that don't require a user to understand key assumptions.
Yes. I mean, when I was at university, SPSS was known as the stats package for social sciences, and people would traditionally ask, please run all analyses. And that is clearly a problem, and things that produce lots of decimal places and really nice graphics but are not based on the right analysis are a problem. And this is one of the downsides of DIY automation, when something that used to require an expert to do it is now something that anybody can run it doesn't mean they will produce the same product. So when you use Photoshop and when I use Photoshop, we end up with a different product because I am not as artistic. And that will persist. And I think people need to recognize that using automation will make them more productive, but it will not necessarily deliver a good product if it still requires the user skill.
Right, okay. And Ray, I will say you are artistic, just in a completely different way, which is good.
I am differently artistic.
Yes. So a question from well, it was regurgitating what you were saying, Ray, in the webinar, but a comment from the Twitter stream from Roddy Knowles, who was saying, sort of repeating, you said, can we use automation in market research to actually increase the market? Now, and then he was saying, well, actually, Ray, if you want to gaze into your crystal ball and make a prediction on that potentially.
Yes, I think we will. I think that we will see a growth in the test and learn, the really rapid pieces. It's a combination of two things. One is that the technology is actually helping that, and I see insight communities doing that, and I see the fact you can buy these cut price link tests and TNS tests through the platforms like Zapier. They're all helping, but actually researchers are also getting better at pointing out to companies when research has delivered value, that the company has made more money, and when a failure to research something properly has led to a loss. So we're going to have to struggle sometimes to define what we mean by the research industry, because some of the uses of data, some of the uses of automation don't necessarily call themselves market research. But I think clearly there is going to be a growth in all of those, and also a growth in qualitative explaining the numbers that then come out of that process.
Right. Now, Ray, earlier you mentioned millennials. What advice would you give to millennials and indeed, shiny new researchers coming into our industry? Any advice that you would give them on preparing for the uses of automation, or indeed being involved in the automation of research?
Yes, a couple of things. I mean, my standard advice to anybody joining the research industry is to become an expert in something. And it almost doesn't matter what it is, but you need to have an expertise. And ideally, that shouldn't be in how to do survey writing, or it shouldn't be in how to run a call center, because those are sort of threatened areas. But develop an expertise. But then for your individual tasks, try not to do the really repetitive, boring ones that are going to be the ones that are automated, and try to get, volunteer to do those things where you are trying the new technology. And if somebody is doing bleeding technology, then actually volunteer to be part of that process, because you're going to learn some stuff. Think about bringing in some of your own tech. So if you are really into VR, bring that into work and suggest that you're going to use it. If you are great with digital art tools, try to suggest that you use some of these, because what you're always looking for, if you are 23, 24, 25, is areas where you have a speciality that the people who are 35 don't have and the people who are 55 don't have. Now, of course, in some companies you'll get right up their nose, in which case change company. But in a good company, they will say, wow, we better get them doing this because they're more in touch with that. And that could be something as simple as the way people are using Snapchat and Instagram, or it could be virtual reality. But just trying to jump on those opportunities, look around you for what's going on, and question why things are done that way. And sometimes when you question why they're done that way, there's a really good reason. And then the next time you question something, you go, we do that because we used to have inkwells, but actually we got rid of the inkwells 30 years ago and we're still doing it. And you'll find that helpful.
Yeah, so if you're a young researcher joining, flaunt the tech knowledge that you've got and get involved with bleeding edge playtesting wherever you can.
Absolutely,
great.
Absolutely, because you're also a low-cost, low-risk resource from the company's point of view.
Yes. Well, that all that sort of thing could be a webinar for another time. But a question here from Sophia Papadopoulos, a second question. Is there any? Are there any really great examples of automation? And I'm guessing this is in relation to insights and research.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the reason why Zapier sponsored us is because they are a really good example of it. So I think that goes without saying. That the fact you can now buy a Millward brand link test by simply going to the site, logging in, buying it, and running it. What you lose is that ability to bespoke it, but you haven't lost it because you can go to Millward Brown and buy it for a higher price and a slightly slower turnaround, but get exactly what you want. So I think that is one really good example there. And a scary example, of course, is the move to online surveys. I say it's scary because it made things faster, cheaper, and not everybody on the line is going to agree with me, but faster, cheaper, but not quite as good. And that has been one of the biggest changes that has happened to our industry. Most people look at the failures of the online panel companies and say, oh, that was a bit flaky. And we've all had studies. You and I have had one, Betty. But the sheer quantity of automation that goes on, that means that they're turning out sample at a price that would be considered ridiculous a few years ago, at speeds that would have been out of anybody's imagination 10 or 15 years ago. All of that is really powerful, active automation in play, making a change to everybody who works in the industry's life.
Right. And this one is from Ross McLean, who is saying, how long do you think it will be before artificial intelligence will be able to contribute significantly to the analysis of qualitative research? And he's put that in capitals, specifically qualitative research. And what would that look like?
Let's not worry too much by what we mean by artificial intelligence. So let's put in algorithms, let's put in machine learning, let's put in deep learning. Then in terms of taking, for example, every open end from a study and analysing it, or taking, better still, let's say you have done 100 online discussions over the last year. Being able to use machine-aided techniques to say, what are the main themes? How many different types of topic are there in there where people are actually motivated? And show me some really good examples of those topics. We're probably about 2 to 3 years away. Now, that's the sort of technology that will make people productive. It's not the sort of AI that is going to replace people. It's actually going to make that sort of analysis much more productive. At the other end, we're probably 2 to 3 years away from taking a normal survey where we've asked questions like along the lines of, what did you like, what did you not like about this ad? And if a company tests their soft drink ads all the time, it will produce a report as good as a junior researcher in 2 to 3 years. It will probably produce a report better than a junior researcher, because the people who do the machine training are senior researchers, but only in those cases where there's a high degree of repetition. And we see this already in things like the systems that BT use to listen to social media. Because there are only so many things that Transport for London get to hear, or British Telecom get to hear, they have already got some really quite sophisticated machines that analyze things and say, this requires attention, this requires a response, this falls into this category, and is processed in that way. So that is already happening. We will see more of that, but it will be a long time before it will replace people. Long time,
right, okay.
5 or 10 years.
And I'm sure lots of people listening are wiping the sweat off their brow with that comment. Well, Ray, that's all the questions from the GoToWebinar people from Twitter. Thank you so much for a really interesting discussion.
Yes, thank you, Betty. With that, I'd like to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to Zapier Store. And until the next time.